Linear television will civilization over time.
The Media Show, Saturday at 4:30 on the BBC News Channel.
Diverse culture of this enigmatic land. Whoa, bravo! That's Wonders of Albania here on BBC World News.
Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to Outside Source. At least 9 Palestinians have been killed in an Israeli raid in the West Bank. The US Secretary of State is to visit Israel and the West Bank next week. Residents have crowded into underground shelters in Kiev as 11 people have been killed across Ukraine in the latest Russian strikes. We'll talk to a former commanding general of the US Army in Europe. Also in this hour, in Scotland, a transgender woman convicted of rape has been moved to a men's prison. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is to travel to Israel, Egypt and the West Bank to urge Israel and the Palestinians to de-escalate tensions. That's after Israeli forces killed 7 Palestinian fighters and 2 Palestinian civilians during a raid. That raid happened here in a refugee camp in the flashpoint town of Jenin. We understand an elderly woman is reportedly among the dead. This is one eyewitness. Joel, as ever, thank you very much indeed for your help. That's Joel Greenberg live with us from Jerusalem. Right, let's update you on the situation in Ukraine. It's once again coming under attack from Russian drones and missiles. This is the day after Germany and the US promised to send modern tanks to Ukraine. We understand today at least 11 people died, with many others injured. This is one witness describing an attack in the Kiev region. Now, let's go to Scotland, where the BBC understands that a trans woman who raped 2 women before she changed gender has now been moved to a men's prison. This matters because, as you may recall, Scotland's recent gender reform bill has prompted a constitutional spat with Westminster. This case concerns transgender woman Isla Bryson, who's now in custody facing a lengthy sentence. But where she should serve her sentence has sparked heated debate. Bryson was remanded to Cornton Vale Women's Prison after being convicted of carrying out the rapes when she was a man called Adam Graham. The 31-year-old began transitioning after being charged for the rapes and while awaiting trial. And she was convicted on Tuesday. She was initially kept at Cornton Vale, Scotland's only female prison. The leader of the Scottish Conservative Party raised this issue at First Minister's questions in the Scottish Parliament. Professor Chappell, we'll have to leave it there. We're right at the end of the half hour. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Professor Sophie Grace Chappell is Chair of Philosophy at the Open University. There is more details on that story at the top of the BBC website, bbc.com/news. You'll find it. It's the lead story at the moment right there. See you in a minute.
Hello there. Yet more snow and heavy rain all around this area of low pressure across the Mediterranean. It's given. Join the conversation and get your voice heard. Global questions on BBC World
Shaping the Future.
Linear television will die over time.
The Media Show, Saturday at 4:30 on the BBC News Channel.
I'm Ros Atkins. This is Outside Source. The Palestinian Authority ends its security cooperation with Israel after a deadly day of violence in the West Bank. The US Secretary of State is to visit the region next week. Residents crowd into underground shelters in Kiev as 11 people are killed across Ukraine in the latest Russian strikes. Also in the programme, we'll update you on clashes that have broken out in Beirut after an apparent attempt to block the resumption of a probe into the 2020 Beirut port blast. And the UK's car production has fallen to its lowest level for 66 years. We'll ask what's needed to reverse the trend. Let's turn back to Ukraine, where the emergency services say 11 people have been killed and another 11 wounded in the latest Russian missile strikes. It comes the day after both Germany and America confirmed that they'd be sending tanks to the Ukrainian military. Germany's defence minister says he wants the vehicles delivered by the end of March. Well, let's go live now to Kiev and speak to the former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Alexei Honcharuk, who is also a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council in the US. Sir, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on the BBC. How significant do you think the announcement of the tanks from America and Germany was yesterday? Mr. Honcharuk, thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Alexei Honcharuk, former Prime Minister of Ukraine. Now, here in the UK, the boss of the tax authority, HMRC, has told MPs there are no penalties for innocent errors. He was being questioned about the tax affairs of the Conservative Party's chairman and Cabinet Minister Nadhim Zahawi. Jim Harrop, head of HMRC, said while he couldn't comment on individual cases, someone would only pay a penalty who'd failed to take reasonable care of their tax matters. Nadhim Zahawi says he's confident he's acted properly. Well, let's bring in our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake from Westminster. Jonathan, what did you make of those comments? All right, Jonathan, we'll watch out for that whenever it comes. Thank you very much indeed. Jonathan's live with us from Westminster. Now let's stay in the UK. The number of cars made here has slumped to its lowest since the 1950s, with companies warning that the country is not doing enough to attract manufacturers. These are the figures behind the story. Just 775,000 new cars rolled off the production line in 2022. That's 10% fewer than the previous year, when more than 850,000 cars were built in the UK. Last year's figure was 40% down on 2019, before the pandemic, when the UK produced 1.3 million vehicles. And production has fallen every year since the UK voted to leave the EU in 2016. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, which compiled all of these figures I'm showing you, says the UK doesn't have a coherent post-Brexit strategy to attract investment into the industry. That's really useful. Paul, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Paul is from Fitch Ratings.
Thank you, Ros.
Now, stay with me here on Outside Source. In a few minutes, we're going to find out how plastic items from decades back are still washing up on the east coast of England.
We start with a
The head
big
of the
win.
inquiry into the Windrush scandal has expressed disappointment after the Home Secretary confirmed she's dropping some of its key recommendations. Wendy Williams' findings have been accepted 3 years ago by the government, and now Suella Braverman says she won't implement all the changes, including increased independent scrutiny of the Home Office immigration policy. The scandal involved thousands of legal British residents, many arriving from the Caribbean in the 1950s and 60s, being wrongly classified as living in the UK illegally.
I want to talk to you about the politics of this.
We couldn't get a doctor.
Did she not think she was going to get
Janet
that question?
Mackay and her partner Anthony Bryan say their lives have been torn apart because of the Windrush scandal.
I have an opportunity to create chaos. There is always an email. We are so insignificant in this cosmos. Do you want some facts on baguettes? I'm just feeding you the stories. Maybe this is the context.
News in depth. The Context with Christian Fraser on BBC World News.
There's a lot of things I couldn't, and that put a lot of stress.
The BBC News Comla Dumont Award
like
is
many
about
other victims,
excellent
they're still waiting for
It's about
compensation
finding
from the
that
Home
talent
Office.
on the
But
continent
today's
that can
government
help us tell
announcement
the African
has caused
story
even more
fully and
resentment
widely.
and distrust. In a written statement from the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, 3 recommendations made in an independent review 3 years ago will now be scrapped. There will no longer be Windrush reconciliation events, a migrants commissioner, and increased powers to the role of the independent chief inspector of borders and immigration.
Any journalist worth their salt should be applying for this award.
My whole idea of storytelling has been turned on its head.
And it widens your scope of understanding of profound journalism and how else you can tell African stories.
Whatever it is that you have maybe what the BBC is looking for, you need to take this opportunity seriously and apply.
For more details on how to apply, please visit
Adina Campbell, BBC News.
bbc.com/Comla
I'm Ros Atkins. We're here in the BBC newsroom as usual. Our lead story is that the Palestinian Authority says it's ending its security cooperation with Israel after one of the deadliest days of violence in the occupied West Bank in years. Well, clashes have broken out in Beirut during protests over an investigation into the deadly explosion that killed more than 200 people. I'm sure you remember this devastating blast from August 2020. It was one of the biggest non-nuclear explosions in history, and it destroyed much of Beirut's port and injured thousands of people. The authorities say it was caused by tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer stocked in a warehouse for many years, which then caught fire. While families of the victims are demanding that the top judge be allowed to continue his probe after prosecutors challenged his authority and released the remaining detainees. Here's more from my colleague Anna Foster. Thanks to Anna for that update. Now, our awareness of plastic pollution may be relatively recent, but the types of plastic washing up on our shores are not. Decades-old mobile phones and lids from sweet tubes are just some of the litter that's been found on the English coast, as our correspondent Paul Murphy reports from Flamborough in East Yorkshire. And Paul's report ends this edition of Outside Source. Thanks as ever for watching. We'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Hello there. Today wasn't as cold across southeastern parts of the UK. Temperatures
snow and heavy
have
rain
evened
with
out
our
at long
impactful
last.
storm
But if you are looking
on
for
Thursday,
sunshine,
moving
it was
out
better
into the Atlantic. Totally and utterly immersed in another world there.
We've got to consider break stories from more places than any other international news broadcaster. We are the leaders in global breaking news. I can't believe I'm now wanting to run away from the place.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Your Tech Update. Click Saturday at 12:30 on the BBC News Channel.
I'm Ros Atkins. This is Outside Source. At least 9 Palestinians have been killed in an Israeli raid in the West Bank. The US Secretary of State is to visit Israel and the West Bank next week. Residents have been crowding in underground shelters in Kiev as 11 people died across Ukraine in the latest Russian strikes. We'll hear from a former commanding general of the US Army in Europe. Also in this half an hour, in Scotland, a transgender woman convicted of rape has been moved to a men's prison. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is to travel to Israel, Egypt and the West Bank to urge Israel and the Palestinians to de-escalate tensions. That's after Israeli forces killed 7 Palestinian fighters and 2 Palestinian civilians during this raid. It happened in a refugee camp in the flashpoint town of Jenin. An elderly woman is reportedly among the dead. This is one eyewitness. Next we go to Scotland, where the BBC understands that a trans woman who raped 2 women before she changed gender has now been moved to a men's prison. This matters because, as you may recall, Scotland's recent gender reform bill has prompted a constitutional spat between the Scottish Government and Westminster. This case concerns transgender woman Isla Bryson, who's now in custody facing a lengthy sentence. But where she should serve that sentence has sparked heated debate. Bryson was remanded to Cornton Vale Women's Prison after being convicted of carrying out the rapes when she was a man called Adam Graham. The 31-year-old began transitioning after being charged with the rapes and while awaiting trial. After she was convicted on Tuesday, she was initially kept at Cornton Vale, Scotland's only female prison. The leader of the Scottish Conservative Party raised this issue at First Minister's questions in the Scottish Parliament. And there's more background on that story via the BBC News website. Now, in a few minutes here on Outside Source, we're going to look at how plastic items from many decades ago continue to wash up on the eastern coast of England.
Now is the time for a new empire.
Soon after liftoff. There were 7 astronauts on board, one of them a woman school teacher. All of them are believed to have been killed.
Now is the time to be ahead.
Part of official Cairo was in the hands of the demonstrators.
Now is the time for unity,
revolution,
for sustainable acts. Now is your time.
The earthquake singled out buildings and brought them down in seconds. Tonight, the search for any survivors has an increasing desperation about it as the hours pass.
The new government is firmly in control of the entire Republic of Uganda.
Survivors of the Auschwitz concentration camp have been commemorating the 40th anniversary of their liberation. They toured the huts, gas chambers and crematoria and relived their horrifying experiences.
Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome back to the BBC Newsroom. Welcome back to Outside Source. In Ukraine, it is come under attack once more from Russian drones and missiles, 24 hours on from Germany and the US promising to send modern tanks into the conflict. At least 11 people are reported to have been killed in these latest Russian strikes. Many others have been injured. And I'm joined now from San Francisco by Colonel Brendan Kearney, who's a military affairs analyst and former chief of staff for America's Marine Forces Europe. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Do you think America and Germany made the right decision? Colonel Kearney, I'll let you go and I'll let you have a sip of your cup of coffee or cup of tea there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, let's talk about the issue of plastic pollution, because though a focus on it may be relatively recent, types of plastics that date back decades are still washing up on the UK's shores. Things like mobile phones or lids from sweet tubes, for example. Our environment correspondent, Paul Murphy, has been to see this issue in Flamborough, in East Yorkshire. And just a quick reminder of our breaking news this half hour. 5 Memphis, Tennessee police officers have been charged with second-degree murder and other crimes in the beating and death of Tyree Nichols. The 29-year-old black man was hospitalised on January the 7th after a traffic stop. He died 3 days later. And that ends this edition of Outside Source. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Hello there. Yet more snow
Hello there.
and
Today
heavy
wasn't as
rain
cold
all
across
around
southeastern
this
parts of the
area
UK.
of low
Temperatures
pressure.